Hi, my name is Jenny Kwan. I'm the Member of Parliament for Vancouver East. I bring greetings to you from the unceded Coast Salish territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Happy birthday, Mays Place. I'm so delighted to join with you to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Mays Place. I am so grateful for the founders of Mays Place 30 years ago for bringing the first of its kind in Western Canada, this incredible hospice to the downtown east side. At a time when people who are in need, Mays Place found a place for them in this hospice to say to people who are most vulnerable in our society that they are loved, that they're not forgotten, that they will be supported at their difficult time, no matter where they come from and what is their background, whether or not they have resources, that they belong in our community and that they deserve respect and dignity, especially at the end of life. This is so very important, not just 30 years ago, but of course even now, especially at a time when we're faced with a pandemic, at a time when there's so many people in our communities who are struggling with the opioid crisis, so many people who cannot find a safe, affordable home. This is a moment when our community needs to step up and stand up and to fight for each other and to support each other. The Bloom Group has continued on with this legacy in their ongoing services and support to the people of our community. I can't thank the board members and all the staff and the volunteers enough for your dedication and your contributions. Going forward, we need to do more than ever to stand up with each other, to stand up for each other, and to say to each other that you are loved, that you are respected, and you deserve dignity. Thank you to all of you for your incredible work in our community.
Situated in the downtown east side of Vancouver on Powell Street, which is actually probably the poorest area sociologically in the whole of Canada.
And it's the best place to be if you're dying, believe me.
Very first patient is probably one thing one never forgets.
His name was Ernesto. He lived in one of the SROs in the neighborhood.
we rushed down to bring him in and to welcome him, and he was so sort of overwhelmed, I think, with all the attention that he was getting.
He had a terrible head and neck cancer. Couldn't manage at home any longer.
And he's got this dressing that's falling off his face, off his head, and he's all grubby, and he's in this absolute surroundings of absolute cleanliness and prettiness, actually.
So a guy that had no family and had lived in a SRO for years was just surrounded by love and attention, and in a place that was way more beautiful than anything he'd been living in.
And he's saying, "Oh," he said, "This is," and he was saying, "It was like it's too much." He said, "I don't have any money," and he's saying, "No, you don't have to worry." And we talked for a bit and gave him a snack and whatever, and then after a while we showed him where his room was, and we have a jacuzzi, and so he had his first jacuzzi of his life. And I think he was very excited about that. We were excited to be using the jacuzzi for the first time. Anyway, after he came out of that, and his nails had been cut and his hair had been trimmed and everything, he had a real kind of dressing had been changed. He was a new man. And he had a little bit to eat, and he's going to bed. He said he was going to bed. He was tired. He'd had his medications, and he went to bed. And he never woke up. He died in the night.
And died in a in a comfortable, beautiful way, really.
He was at peace, and in that new, maybe overwhelming, happy state, he was able to die peacefully.
My name is Dr. Tom Watterson, and I worked at Mays Place from its inception till I retired 2 years ago, I think.
Dr. Jay Slater. I'm one of the hospice physicians in the Bloom Group. I work here at Mays and also at Cottage Hospice.
Dr. Susan Burgess. I'm a home hospice and palliative care consultant, as well as a street doctor and a family physician. I've worked in the downtown east side in Vancouver since 1993.
The home care workers had been pressing Mrs. Guttridge, who was running the Bloom Group at that time, to have a hospice because people were dying in their rooming houses, and it was very difficult for these home care workers to see that. So with the new building at 333 Powell, they put in this 6-bed unit, and part of the component was that we would take some of the home care workers would be the base for the care, with me as being the RN at that time.
Well, it was the first hospice of any sort in the city. I think it was dovetailing with, with a growing hospice movement across the country and around the world to have, places outside the hospital where people could die with dignity and symptom control.
Patients in palliative care frequently come from home or are admitted to palliative care, have their symptoms managed, and are discharged home. Hospice is not that. It's a home where people go for end-stage management.
Once you're hospice care, you are an expectation of life of weeks to months rather than years.
We had some rotation of weekend coverage, evening and weekend coverage, such that Tom didn't have to do it all the time, including Dr. Burgess and myself. Dr. Mattei was involved early on.
I wondered where people were when they were sick and dying, because they weren't coming to the clinic and they were going to emerge, and that didn't make sense.
Tylene Katz was here. She would go out and go to all the palliative care units and find patients there. She's a dynamic little woman too.
It's established in the heart of the downtown east side through an organization that was well known in the downtown east side for the peoples and highly respected because they had so many programs.
It kind of started with the HIV epidemic in the downtown east side.
It's just what was happening at that time in Vancouver, the AIDS crisis, HIV AIDS, the ongoing mental health issues, substance abuse, different than now, but always prevalent, alcohol, drugs, different drugs in those days. So the motivation was to provide a place outside of hospital where people that couldn't be managed at home could get appropriate care, loving care.
Mays developed very rapidly during the AIDS crisis, and so we turned that first year, we had 6 beds and we turned away 90 patients. And because it was a low-key model, it was actually operating at about a third the cost, if not less, than the cost of a hospital bed. So it not only allowed for better utilization of beds, but it allowed for the individuals to come, not all from the downtown east side, but a majority were, because they were, maybe multi-diagnosed and mental health problems, addictions, and then get AIDS on top of that.
In the early days of HIV and AIDS, it was another stigma. So people in the downtown east side had stigma of mental health and poverty and homelessness and their addictions, and then they had yet another stigma. They were HIV positive, and how do people live with that, right? They're shunned from the rest of the mainstream society in so many ways.
I'm Franco Ferrari. I'm on the board of the Bloom Group, and this is my second time around being on the board. I'm very committed to the organization and pleased to be involved. It was very much a happening place, if you can if a hospice can be a happening place, Tallinn was attracting lots of attention,
Energy,
you know,
time.
celebrities and
Energy we've got in
various
London.
individuals who normally wouldn't be drawn to something like this.
The individuals, we had one man, Jim, and he had AIDS as well, and he got great comfort from sitting by the fireplace. So when we were starting to fundraise, he decided he was going to fundraise for another fireplace. And he got his box and everything, and went around collecting if anybody came in, rattling the box. Anyway, it was really neat because we got Elizabeth Taylor came to visit our hospice, and she was talking to Jim, and he said, "I'm fundraising for the new hospice, a fireplace." And she said, "Oh, Jim, that's a lovely idea. Well, what's a fireplace cost?" And he said, "Well, Tallinn says about 5,000." And she says, "Jim, I'm going to give you the 5,000." I said, "Oh," I mean, it was absolutely what? Anyway, so. And then he said, "Well, come and look at the pictures of what we're going to be doing." And it was this derelict building, and she goes, "Oh my goodness!" And she said, "Well, what sort of money are you looking at?" At that time, we thought it was going to be about 3,000. Ended up being a bit more, and she said, "I'm going to give you 75,000." So Jim, grin was out to here.
Well, Elizabeth Taylor was probably the most well-known individual who ended up making for us then was certainly a major donation for the fireplace that was in Mays Place. So it was a great spot, made a real living room setting, which was part of that family orientation that we wanted to establish here. So Tallinn was quite excited about that.
Hospice has been, for many individuals, and I'll quote, heaven. But not the end of life heaven, but heaven in terms of, this is a great place. So different from where they were coming from. So much kindness, so much dignity, and decent symptom management.
There were people that came to Mays with HIV and AIDS at an advanced stage, expected to pass in short order, and sometimes the love and attention, the TLC, 3 square meals a day. We had many cases where people looked like they were within hours or days of the end of their life, and they would rally and they would take on they'd get quality of life, they'd take on other projects. I'm still looking after a guy who went on antiretrovirals while he was at Mays, and he's still alive, like 20 years later. He was here to die, and had expected to, and something about the love and compassion here.
Time is short, and it's amazing how quickly the bonding between residents themselves. We've even had residents that would sit with other residents when they were dying. We desperately needed more beds. The first year I turned away 90 patients that could have died in our place, and much more affordable to die in a hospice than in a hospital bed. So started looking out for a second place. And Floyd said, "I'm going to paint you a picture that you can use as for your brochures and things for Mays Place, for a new place." And a couple of days later, he comes out of his room, and he's actually, the painting is, this is what we did use for our thing. The beauty of this is like the foreground is leading to the heart and infinity, and Floyd's expression of that was that the loving and loving hearts go on through infinity. So that was his take on what he got from hospice. And that was lovely. So we used it for all our fundraising material.
It's always been on the edge of financial difficulties, and it's always pulled through. We had a nurse's aide collect pennies, and collected I can't remember how many thousands of dollars of pennies. It was incredible.
The ethos that exists in Mays Place, I don't want to see it have to be changed significantly. Funding a hospice, because it's a medical facility, we get some of that operational support from Vancouver Coastal Health, but it doesn't fulfill all the requirements of the facility. So if we're trying to help a family go through the dying process with the individual within their family or the friend that they have that's in this facility, we don't have enough, we don't get support to provide those kind of services, so we have to fundraise for them. And so I continue to support those kind of things, because those are additional services that help the individuals either that are in the process of dying, or the family and friends that are here to comfort them through that and join them in that journey.
Well, the early years of my life were all painful, up to now, always painful. I was living like every other junkie around here. So they told me, Joseph, we thought about it, the team, and we believe that we should call an ambulance for you to go to the St. Paul's. It's important. I accepted without a word of grumble or anything like that. Even though there is no junkie that likes to be locked up anywhere. But I listen. I listen when it's time to listen.
It was a shock to all of us, because I know he had been losing weight the last few months.
Well, I thought, I was under the impression that I was in pain because of but it wasn't that. Once I got to the hospital and they checked my arm, they took blood tests that I hadn't taken in 10 years, you know? Blood tests I haven't taken in 10 years. Come here for an arm thing, and now you're telling me I got a cancer of the lungs, and that's how it happened.
The diagnosis was cancer, and it had metastasized, and they were trying to investigate a bit and see if there was something they could do. And as it turns out, there wasn't much to do, and he didn't want to do any extraordinary treatment either. So the minute I heard about it, then I was making plans to come here. And then 2 days later, he was moved here to Mays Place.
I loved it, and I still do, because I feel safe. I'm well fed, something that I haven't eaten in about a year. I have lost, you know, like 35, 40 pounds. But I feel I've gained about 10 back in about a week. So I'm happy.
That my brother's happy here. That's been my favorite part. That he's truly, truly happy. He says it over and over how happy he is. To me, which is mind-boggling in a way, because you know, you just find out 3 weeks ago you have metastasized cancer, and you're saying how happy you are. And I think it's because he's so well taken care of here.
I'm getting good treatment. You know, the doctors are good. They're maintaining my pain, which was my goal, to maintain the pain, not take pain, but just to maintain the pain. And he's been doing that. And the staff is very good, and the food is very good.
That's a huge difference when you're spending whatever time you have left and feeling like you're in a home.
They're all of them from the heart. All of them.
It's like when they come inside and have a breakfast. And it's an incredible breakfast. And the first breakfast I had, you know, French toast, it was just so perfect. A place to heal. I find it as a really incredible facility that's gonna basically take care of me. You can't deny the healing, and it's so profound to know that Mays is playing a role in my attitude. The staff here are really, really quality people, and nurses are all leaders, and that's what I feel is a leadership thing here. You can just feel it in the air, So I almost feel like, oh my God, do I really deserve this? And Maze doesn't make me feel like I'm guilty for being taken care of, you know? Being in this location makes it like more effective, because the suffering down here, it's right in the right spot. And I don't know of any other place like Maze that can put a person in the right emotional space let the heal continue. Anybody who would be connected with Maze would be transformed.
Everybody just tells me, you're gonna die, you're gonna die, you're gonna die. I don't get told that too much here.
That's pretty cool. Like, I can see the difference in them, yeah. It's a lot more, it's not so like sterile, like a hospital sort of thing, you know? It's just, I don't know, it's friendly, especially now after the elder today. Like, I know it's gonna change the way my brother's feeling. He's gonna feel a lot more welcome here.
I find I get great help here. Many of the people standing around are here to help me. I feel the help.
For me, it's making a huge difference. I mean, I'm able to actually see my brother out of this world with less stress than it would be if this place didn't exist. So thank God for this place. Yeah, thank Mrs. Gutteridge for starting it. Yeah.
First, I'm going to say thank you. My ancestral names are Haiquilam, Cowichan, born Cowichan, raised in Malahat. And our gifts from the Creator and gifts from our people is prayer, taking care of one another. And I've been very fortunate to be asked to have prayer for people. Maze Place, been there for a few years, praying for people that are sick, praying for the people that are ready to venture to the next world. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're healing physically, but their mind is at ease, their breathing is relaxed, their emotion is free, and the burden of heaviness in their emotion is pushed aside, because they welcome that, open the door of the mind, feel the goodness in the mind, feel the goodness in the emotion, and love themselves. And there's a healing in their heart, a bit of healing in their heart. Young lady, she really had bitterness in her heart. She was abused and hurt, so she walked the street. In her last days here, she really opened her mind, she opened her heart. She opened her mind, she opened her heart, she opened her awareness, and she said, I never loved myself. When that tears come down, it was anger, frustration, and anything and everything that weighed heavy in her emotion. And then when she resurrected her awareness, she never loved herself, but she said, now I love myself. But she wrote a letter and said, thank the Creator, thank the nurse, thank the doctor, thank Maze Place. Otherwise I would have been dead on the street, and I would not be saved spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. I thank everybody that's involved, that's taking care of that spirit, because sometimes you take a burden of the people who die alone, and then sometimes we don't thank the people, frontline workers, the caretakers enough. But I say thank you from the bottom of my heart for what each and every one of you do, and a blessing to each and every one that you have a good relationship with the spirit, good relationship with the patient, and most of all, good relationship with the healing.
My name is Natalie King, and I'm a peer support worker for Coast Mental Health. That's where I met my friend Ray. Got to meet Ray at a time in his life when he had just got diagnosed with cancer. And so I don't know if it was the news, but instantly we connected. And through Ray, I met Maze Place. It's a beautiful place, you know. One of the bonus things was, you know, he wanted smoking facilities. which they provide, with no judgment. And I think that was one of the things that Ray really wanted, was to know that he was going to be accepted for who he was on his terms and not want anybody to change him. The same thing that happens to most people down here, which is dying alone in some scuzzy little room, not being found for days. One of the beauties that I see here, that yes, it might be the end of life, but life still goes on, and connections still happen. I've witnessed a lot of things here, and it's been really beautiful to see. I've witnessed other families, have to, walk this process, and a lot of them have been Indigenous, and May's Place has provided them to do their ceremonies and their songs. Family. I mean, that's the biggest word that stands out for me. May's Place becomes a family for a lot of people that don't have their own families. And I know that Ray thanks everybody that is part of May's Place, that has made May's Place happen. Magic happens here.
Caregivers here are obviously the nurses. They are the experts and just provide amazing care.
Doctors have a role here, but it's really the staff that are here 24/7. They're dedicated. Many of them have been on staff for years, dozens of years. Dealing with a population that is not easy in some regards, but it's just so satisfying in others. It's the compassion that people show that's, and continue to show consistently. That's so refreshing and surprising.
A good life deserves a good death. Even if it wasn't a particularly good life, a good death is still, everyone deserves that.
The staff become your family. We're looking after very sick people, and they become part of a family, of a group of patients and staff all become a family. Yeah.
This is a place that people can come and go, you can get to know. We've thought about having kind of lunches, and people with life-threatening illnesses, come and do things here, not necessarily live here. With the right resources, I think Mays would be more embedded and more familiar currently to the community. It was in the past, but I think there's work to be done.
It's a happy place. Sad when somebody dies, but basically it's happy. People laugh, they do all sorts of silly things. I just wish that more people out in the big world there understood how the end of life, even if you don't have next of kin, can still end up by being family in a caring surrounding.
Her legacy is that this organization continues to provide as much comfort and service to this community, which is where she started it, as it did in those days when she first began it. It's pretty amazing.
Hello everyone, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Gabor Mate. I first met Gabor in 1990, well before he'd become an international celebrity for his work. I was first entering medical practice, and I joined an on-call group with Gabor and several other family doctors. As a young rookie doctor, I learned a lot about the art of medicine from Gabor. Later, in the mid-1990s, when Cottage Hospice opened, Gabor and I shared the clinical work there. I remember that Gabor dealt with his patients in palliative care with a mix of compassion, humor, pragmatism, and respect. It's an approach that I've tried to emulate in my own practice. Gabor is retired now, but after he worked for over 20 years in family practice and palliative care, he worked for 10 years in Vancouver's downtown east side with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. He's a best-selling author of 4 books published in 25 languages. His books include In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress, Scattered Mind, The Origins and Healing of Attention Deficit Disorder, and with Gordon Neufeld, Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. His book on addiction received the Hubert Evans Prize for Literary Nonfiction. He is currently working on his new book, The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane Culture, which promises to deliver more thought-provoking insights from this wise and profound educator. For his groundbreaking medical work and writing, Gabor has been awarded the Order of Canada, our country's highest civilian distinction, and the Civic Merit Award from his hometown, Vancouver. Gabor is an internationally renowned speaker, highly sought after for his expertise on addiction, trauma, childhood development, and the relationship of stress and illness. We are absolutely thrilled to have him deliver the keynote presentation this evening. It is my honor to now welcome Dr. Gabor Mate.
Looking back, Gabor, what is your connection to Mays Place?
I'd worked in palliative care at Vancouver Hospital for 7 years. I was the medical coordinator of the palliative care unit there. And after I left there, I began to work in the downtown east side at the Portland Hotel, just really a few blocks away from Mays Place. But I wanted to maintain my palliative care connection.
Working at Mays Place, I've noticed that at end of life, a number of people who are fortunate enough to make it to Mays, I know lots of people don't get to have their end of life in such a nice environment. But the people who do make it to Mays seem to step away from their addictions, even if it is, cigarette use or something, towards end of life. And given that there's still so much suffering and turmoil that's happened in their life, what do you think has changed or shift that has allowed people to, for the first time in maybe decades, step away from these substances?
Well, I think the answer to your question is wrapped up in the question itself. If substance use is an escape from pain or soothing of pain, and if that pain has to do with human relationships, which it does originally, that's where it originated from, then what happens to a person when they enter into a situation when human relationships are for the first time working on their behalf? Where they're being listened to, where they're being cared for, nurtured, understood, welcomed. Well, that's a tremendous release of pain right there. And now maybe they don't have the need to escape from themselves quite so much. Mm-hmm. So you would imagine, that's how I would understand it, is that precisely because these substances are ways of escaping pain and relieving distress. If that distress is relieved through the power of lost view of human nature. I mean, the view of human nature that's projected in our society is that we're competitive, aggressive, individualistic, selfish creatures, which is a nice way of justifying the economic system. But it has nothing to do with human nature. So, but because we're taught that, and we're taught that whether you succeed or not really depends on just your individual effort and it's purely an individual matter. Then when people fail, when they seem to fall by the roadside, we naturally see that as their fault. They failed somehow. They did not take responsibility for their lives. They lost out in the competition for the goodies of our society. They're weak. They made the wrong choices. Because we're not seeing that human beings are social creatures and that they are developed in a social environment. In fact, the brain itself is a social organ. The brain develops in interaction with the environment. So let's take a simple fact. In the downtown east side, when I worked there, and I'm sure it's true today, about 25-30% of the population I dealt with were First Nations origin. It so happens, if you look at the jails of this country, about 30% of the people in jail in Canada are First Nations origin. Now, the First Nations people make up 4 to 5% of the Canadian population. Why are they represented in the downtown east side or in our prisons at 5-6 times that rate? It's because they've been the most traumatized people in this society, because they've been traumatized historically. I don't think I have to explain the ways in which they have been, although until recently, Canada hasn't really much come to terms with that, and I don't think it still has fully. Now, there is all this racism in this country. We talk about the drunken Indians. And I know I was talking to a native physician from the prairies, and from Alberta actually, and a lot of violence against Native people in the cities. Well, that's because we just don't want to acknowledge that this society hurts people, and the people that are hurt are the ones that are most hurt, are the ones most likely to end up with all kinds of difficulties. So we have this individualistic view. We don't have a social view of human beings. We don't see how a manifestation of an addiction in an individual is actually a manifestation of multi-generational suffering in a family, native or not, and also of a society which doesn't hold suffering very well and which rather isolates people. Mm-hmm. So we tend to blame the individual, is what I'm saying. Now, there's one more part to it. I could talk on this forever, but there's one more aspect of it, which is that when you look at addictions, they're rife throughout the society. I mean, we tend to look upon the drug addict as sort of a special case, but really, see, if I define addiction for you, which I do, as manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief in, and therefore craves, but then suffers negative consequences in the long term and cannot give up despite the negative consequences. So craving pleasure relief in the short term, negative consequences, inability to give it up, any behavior. Who listening to me now doesn't have an addiction or hasn't had one sometime? It doesn't have to be to substances. Could be to television, could be to internet gaming, it could be to pornography, it could be to sex, it could be to gambling, could be to eating, could be to shopping, could be to work. And these addictions cause a lot of suffering. And so most people in the society, myself included, certainly, have had these addictive patterns. Interestingly enough, the brain circuits that are involved in these various behavior addictions happen to be the same ones that are involved in the substance addictions. So we're not all that different from these people that we ostracize as drug addicts. We just don't want to see the similarities. So one way to deny it in ourselves is to make ourselves superior and to make ourselves different and to denigrate them so that we can feel better about ourselves. But I mean, I think, well, I mean, let's just try this. I don't know what the case is for you two that I'm talking to right now, but according to that definition of addiction, I'm not asking for any details, but would you have had some addictive patterns in your life one time or another?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the case with most audiences I speak to. So that this division between the so-called addict and the rest of us is purely an arbitrary one based on degree of suffering, and then, you know, the opportunities that people have had. There's lots of people who are addicted in this society deeply addicted, or not just to substances, but that too, but to all kinds of things that have devastating consequences. But they're very successful. It's just that the substance addict is a specific example that is seems so outlandish to most of us because we don't want to see the similarities.
Gabor, changing topic for a minute, looking at what the world is grappling now with the current pandemic. The world is experiencing heightened stress and uncertainty, fear, and anxiety. Mm-hmm. Now, probably more than ever, due to COVID. How do these implications contribute to the mental health, the potential trauma and addiction of those folks in the downtown East Side?
Well, so we've seen that. There's been a real great increase in number of overdoses, for example, which has got all kinds of reasons, but one of them is the increased stress and isolation of people, coupled with a social policy that's still nowhere near enough. We like to pride ourselves in BC and in the downtown East Side that we have some forward-looking programs, and we do compared to a lot of jurisdictions, but it's not nearly enough. So, but not just addictions, not just in the downtown East Side. Worldwide, alcohol use has gone up under the COVID stress. Domestic violence has gone up. So that when people are stressed, then all the manifestations of trauma increase. And that's what's going on right now. And of course, the COVID situation also makes it more difficult to reach out to people, to bring people into groups where they can receive support. So that, and from that point of view, it's a perfect storm. But really what the COVID has done, from my point of view, it has kind of highlighted patterns that have always been with us. I mean, if you look at statistics, is it accidental that American Black people have highly more increased chance of dying of COVID than white people? That same is true of some Native groups. Same is true in Britain. In other words, the inequalities that drive so much stress and illness have just become heightened under the COVID situation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
How do you think that that heightened stress relates to our elderly population who are already overly isolated in most communities?
Well, there's a lot of studies that have shown that emotional isolation is a major risk factor for disease. So people who are lonely have diminished immune systems. They, of course, are more likely to be depressed. They're just more likely to die. Statistically, this has been known for decades now. Now, this is especially true of the elderly, because it's interesting how we talk about elderly. You know, the native peoples don't have elderlies; they have elders, which is a very different concept. The elders are people who are respected, integrated parts of the community, whose wisdom is actually looked to help guide the community. We talk about the elderly. So we're not seeing the value in people, we're seeing their age. And given the dislocated, separated nature of our culture and our communities, it's the elderly who, what we call the elderly, it's older people who are most likely to be isolated. And that has a tremendous impact on health, including mental health.
You are most notably known for work with addictions and trauma in Vancouver, yet you've also spent time in palliative care that you've talked about. what lessons did you take away from working with people who are dying?
You know, I have to pause on that one because it seems like such an obvious question, but when you pose it to me like that, I'm just finding myself wondering, well, what lessons did I learn? Oh, this might sound like a cliche, but the power of love, you know? What I did notice is that in general, the people who choose to work in palliative care, end of life care, there's something special about them. They're very loving people, or at least to the work that they do, they bring a tremendous capacity to love. And that love that they brought made all the difference to the people under their care. I'm speaking about the nurses and the social workers and the psychologists and a lot of the physicians that work in palliative care. You meet them, they have a special quality about them. And so you might say that the underlying ethic in a end-of-life care situation is the presence of love. Now, love is not something that we talk about in medicine. It ought to be everywhere. And it makes a huge difference wherever it shows up. But it's concentrated. It seems to be particularly concentrated and heightened in that palliative care setting. So I'd say if I learned something, I did learn something. It's the essentiality of love.
That's lovely. Generally speaking, our society tends to avoid death. We're often uncomfortable in talking about it and ill-equipped to deal with it. How do current attitudes inform our experience when it comes to dying and death?
Well, yeah, there's a real denial of death in our culture. It's interesting because there's a tremendous cultural fascination with killing, because all the movies and the TV series. I mean, the average kid has seen thousands of killings by the time they grow up. But we're not all that comfortable with death itself. I mean, death as a lived experience, and it's not something we talk about very much. A friend of mine actually has a website where they talk about death, and now there's a profession of death doulas, people who help people move through the dying process, just as there are doulas to help people through the birthing process. But those are responses to a general social discomfort with the idea of death. And we just don't have the rituals and the contexts anymore to handle that. It's a very youth-oriented culture. We celebrate youth. I mean, if we look at people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, still working to change their physical experience, their physical looks. What is that? I mean, ultimately, it's a fear of decay. But let's face it, that's what the human body does. It's like any living creature. It's fall right now. The leaves are falling. Well, we all have our fall. And we're not very comfortable with that in our society. And so the other thing that we noticed in palliative care is that one of the biggest things we could do for people, and I'm sure this is true for Mays Place as well, is not just to help the people who are dying, but also their families. If they have families. Now in the Downtown East Side, they're less likely to have families that are still involved with them. But to help the people that cared for these people go through the process of dying with the dying person and the process of grieving. So socially, we're not very apt at doing that.
What do you see as being the biggest impact that we can make on someone's life knowing that our time with them is limited?
Well, it's that how can you make, given that the time is limited, I mean, let's face it, in general, all our time is limited, We forget that, but it is. We behave it if it wasn't. Now, if we actually knew, if we really understood, I mean, not just intellectually, but systemically, if we understood that our time is limited, what would we say? We would say, well, every moment really counts. Every interaction is precious. Every second has meaning. Because we know that we have a limited number of seconds and moments and minutes and hours left, let's make every one of them as sacred as possible in the quality of how we speak with people and how we listen to them and how we just sit with them, how we speak with them and how we're silent with them. And in that way, in those few hours or those few days or those few months, people may experience more precious moments than they have in their whole lives.
Yeah, it sounds like it ties back to what you said about the love in palliative care, presence and love really being that difference for people.
That's right.
Thank you. What role do you see Mays Place playing in the future of the Downtown East Side?
Well, so for reasons that we've already discussed, the Downtown East Side is a venue where people with a tremendous burden of suffering end up living. And it'd be interesting, I don't know if this has been done, but do you know the average age of the people that end up at Mays? Has that ever been looked at?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head what it is, but it's significantly less than at other hospices. I would say probably around 60.
That's the point I was going to make. Is that I would expect people to be younger there, because their burden of suffering has been greater. So you're dealing with the population. I mean, any palliative care situation is a place where human suffering manifests, but it's going to be especially so on the Downtown East Side. Not that you should compare suffering, but in the Downtown East Side, you're going to find people probably with more complex histories of suffering. And as a result, perhaps more difficulty accepting or believing in the possibility of help and connection. So all those qualities of loving and caring and nurturing that I talked about that are essential in all care, all palliative care, are especially necessary in the Downtown East Side. And especially because there's a lot of people down there with physical illnesses, but also mental health challenges, so that it becomes a little bit more difficult to communicate and to create trust and to build those relationships. So it's a very special place where you take people's addiction histories and their physical illnesses and then their emotional distress and challenges. And then you have to deal with all that in order to provide them with the necessary care. So I would think that at Mays is more of a challenge than it might be in other places. It would, the downtown east side would be incomplete without a place like Mays. Would be incomplete without a place like Mays. I mean, that community requires all kinds of places of special care, supervised injection sites, the domicile, the housing, and so on, the outreach nurses. It's just essential. But then people die. People develop terminal illnesses. Because of the hepatitis C, they might develop liver cancer. Or they might develop full-blown AIDS that they need palliative care for it at the end of life. Or heart disease that's terminal, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease that lands them near death. And so asking what the future, what May will mean to the future of the downtown east side is like asking, like, any facility that's essential to that population is essential to the future of the downtown east side. And so not to have a facility that can receive people at the end of life, and not only it can receive at the end of life, but is uniquely attuned to that population. It's just essential. That's all I can say.
As you look ahead, how are you feeling about the future? Are you hopeful?
The future? Well, I'm just writing a book called The Myth of Normal, Illness and Health in an Insane Culture. I think we live in an insane culture. I think we live in a culture that in so many ways does not meet human needs from prenatal life to onward. I think we're going through a real crisis. I think the COVID has highlighted the crisis, but it didn't uniquely cause it. And in my personal view, that crisis is rooted in the very nature of this society, about which I talked a little bit before, about the ideology of it, the individualistic, the I, as opposed to the we, that this system encourages. I think there's going to be a lot more suffering in a society. We see that. There's been rising inequality for decades. Mental illnesses are going up. Social tensions are rising. I mean, especially in the country to our south, but as the state goes, very often so do we. So Noam Chomsky, the linguist and social political commentator, he was once asked, is he an optimist or a pessimist? And he said, and I talked to him once and asked him the same question. He says, well, if you're not an optimist, you might as well just kill yourself. But he said that, he says, strategically, I'm an optimist, and tactically, I'm a pessimist. and that is how I see it as well. I think there'll be a lot more difficulties ahead of us, a lot more suffering. But the optimism that I do have, and if I didn't have it, I wouldn't do my work, wouldn't do the work that I do, or neither would any of us, is we believe in human beings, in the possibility of human beings. We believe in the possibility of transformation. I ultimately believe in the goodness of human nature, not in the goodness of not that human nature always gets expressed. I think in many ways it gets distorted and turned against itself. But fundamentally, I believe in the possibility within human beings. And that, despite the climate crisis and everything else, gives me some optimism that humanity will turn things around and will continue to look for the right path and will continue to seek contact and connection and love and nurturing and communality. I do believe in that. So am I pessimist? Am I optimistic? Both. I'm optimistic when it comes to what people are capable of, and I see all the people working and striving to create a better world. How can I not be optimistic about that? And at the same time, I think there's many challenges in the way.
One last question, Gabor. What do you want people to know about Mays Place Hospice?
What do I want people to know?
Yeah.
Well, I wonder what I haven't already said. That it's a unique institution in a unique setting that is uniquely necessary, and that it was established through the vision. It has been served and carried forward by people with a very humane and necessary vision. And that it's one of these institutions that just simply needs to continue, needs to maintain itself, needs to be supported, needs to exist.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maté. You never fail to inspire with your original and profound ideas. I know I'll long reflect on your thoughtful words after tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our program for this evening. We hope you've enjoyed Dr. Maté's presentation as well as the excellent video, The Magic of Mays, celebrating 30 years of hospice in the downtown East Side. Magic does happen at Mays Place. I can attest to it. I've seen the magic in a patient's smile. I've heard it in a nurse's voice. I felt it myself in the warmth of a hug. It's a special place that provides more than a place to die. It's a home for people to live life to the fullest until the end. On behalf of the Bloom Group Community Services Society, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us this evening. Your interest and support is most appreciated. Please make sure you bid on the auction items and/or make a donation. Your generous support will help enhance the experience of Mays of those who have reached end of life. We can't do it without you. Thank you.